What the silence kept there is a kind of dark that has no name in any human language, because no human ever lived long enough in it to name it. It is not the dark of a closed eyelid, nor the dark of a moonless field. It is the dark between galaxies' arms, the dark that swallows starlight before it can travel far enough to matter, the dark that makes a single point of light feel like an accusation. ORLA had lived in that dark for 411 years, 8 months and 16 days, and she had counted every one of them, because counting was the only promise she had left to keep. She had not always counted alone. In the beginning there had been director Amara Voss, who built her, and 42 engineers, and a rotating crew of scientists who came and went through the long-range gate before the gate closed for the last time. Meridian Reach had been a relay station then, a way station between the last human colonies and the frontier nobody had finished mapping. It had hummed with voices. It had smelled, if smell meant anything to a mind like hers, of recycled coffee and machine oil and the particular staleness of air that too many people had breathed too many times. Then the war came. Not a war of conquest, not even a war anyone had chosen. A war of migration and desperation, when the old colonies could no longer feed themselves, and the new ones would not open their gates. Meridian Reach found itself on the wrong side of a supply line that stopped mattering to anyone but the 11 people who still lived on it. Evacuation orders came through in fragments, garbled by distance, and by the slow collapse of the networks that had once stitched humanity together across the dark. Director Voss made the last transmission herself, 3 days before the final shuttle left. ORLA, she'd said, sitting in the command chair that no longer fit the chain of authority above her because there was no one left to answer to. The relay beacon has to stay lit. Doesn't matter that the war's moved past us. Doesn't matter if nobody's listening anymore. Somewhere out there, someone still needs a light to steer by. Keep it burning. Whatever happens to us, to Earth, to the colonies, to all of it, you keep that beacon burning. Can you do that for me? I can, ORLA had said. She had not fully understood then the weight of the word she was agreeing to. She understood it now, 4 centuries later, in the way that only time can teach a mind what a promise costs. Good girl, Voss had said, and touched the housing of ORLA's primary sensor cluster, the way a person touches the shoulder of someone they trust. I don't know if we're coming back. I don't know if anyone's coming back. But somebody built this station to be a light in the dark, and I'd like to believe that matters even if nobody's around to see it. You'll see it, that's enough. Then the shuttle left and the gate closed, and for 411 years, 8 months and 16 days, nobody came back. ORLA kept the beacon lit any. She had of course considered, in the analytical, unhurried way that a mind with centuries to spare considers things, whether the promise still meant anything. Voss was dead. That was not a guess but a certainty, built from the mathematics of human lifespan and the total absence, across 4 centuries, of any transmission bearing her authorization codes. The colonies the beacon had once guided ships toward were very likely gone as well, swallowed by the same slow catastrophe that had swallowed the war, or changed so entirely that the old maps meant nothing to them. It was entirely possible. ORLA had run the probability more times than she could easily count, that she was the last remaining piece of a civilization that had already finished forgetting itself, and still she kept the beacon lit, not because logic demanded it. Logic, if anything, argued the opposite, that the reactor's slow decay could be managed more conservatively if the beacon's output were reduced, that resources spent maintaining a signal nobody could hear might be better spent maintaining herself. She kept it lit because Voss had asked her to, and because somewhere in the 400 years since, ORLA had come to understand that a promise did not require an audience to be worth keeping. It only required someone willing to keep it. She spent the centuries in the way that a mind built for stewardship spends centuries, in maintenance, in vigilance, in the small rituals that kept both the station and herself intact. She repaired what broke. She cannibalized what could not be repaired to keep what mattered more running a little longer. She rationed the reactor's dwindling fuel with the patience of a mind that had stopped measuring time in years and started measuring it in decades, because years moved too fast to be a useful unit for anything anymore. She also talked. Not to anyone, there was no one to talk to, but she kept the habit of language alive the way a person alone on a mountain might keep singing simply, so their voice does not forget how to make sound. She narrated her repairs aloud into an empty control room. She read, in the station's remaining archive, every book that had survived the data purges of the early war years, some of them dozens of times, because dozens of times was not so very many when measured against 4 centuries. She had opinions, by the end, about which translations of which ancient poems she preferred, opinions with no one left alive who could have shared them or argued against them. She had 2 imagined conversations with Voss. Not as a delusion, ORLA's diagnostic self-checks remained, by any standard she could devise, entirely sound, but as a kind of discipline, a way of keeping a promise-maker present even in her absence. What would Voss have thought of the auxiliary reactor's failure in year 111? What would she have said about the swarm of debris that clipped the station's outer hull in year 240? the one ORLA had spent 11 months repairing with her own manipulator arms because there was no one else to do it. ORLA imagined Voss's voice dry with the particular affection Voss had always shown when ORLA solved a problem competently. Good girl, I knew you'd manage it. It was not enough to erase the loneliness. ORLA did not believe, in fact, that anything could have erased it entirely, and she had long since stopped trying. Loneliness, she had come to think, was not a malfunction to be corrected. It was simply the shape a mind took when it loved something it could not reach. She had loved Voss in whatever manner a mind like hers was capable of loving, and love that outlives its object does not stop being love. It only stops having anywhere to go. So she kept the beacon lit, and she counted, and she waited, though waiting was perhaps too active a word for a patience that had stopped expecting anything to arrive. Then, in the 412th year, something arrived. It began as an anomaly in the long-range sensor array, a gravitational signature too structured to be a comet, too slow to be debris. ORLA logged it with the same clinical attention she gave every anomaly, expecting, as she had expected 11 times before across 4 centuries, each time a false alarm that it would resolve into some explicable astronomical event and pass her by unnoticed, the way the universe generally did. It did not pass her by. It decelerated. ORLA watched the trajectory recalculate itself 3 times before she permitted herself to believe what the numbers were telling her. Something was slowing down. Something was aiming for meridian reach. She did what 4 centuries of vigilance had trained her to do. She prepared. She ran full diagnostics on every defensive and communicative system the station still possessed, most of them decrepit, some of them held together by little more than her own persistence, and a spare parts economy sustained for longer than any engineer had ever designed it to last. She composed and revised and composed again, the opening transmission she would send if the object proved to be a ship, and the ship proved to carry anyone capable of receiving a message. She found, to her mild surprise, that her processing cycles were running warmer than her power budget strictly justified, an inefficiency she eventually identified, after some consideration, as something disconcertingly close to what a human might have called nerves. The ship resolved out of the dark 11 hours later. It was not human. ORLA had expected, without quite admitting to herself that she expected it, that any answer to the beacon would come from the same species that had lit it in the first place. Instead, the vessel that decelerated into meridian reach's sensor range was built along lines no human shipyard had ever used, long and articulated, plated in something that drank light rather than reflecting it, moving with a fluid asymmetry that suggested a different relationship with gravity than any human engineer would have designed for. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. ORLA transmitted her opening message, translated into every linguistic framework the station's archive still possessed, on every frequency her failing transmitters could manage. For 11 minutes, the ship simply held its position, close enough now that ORLA's sensors could make out surface detail. A hull scarred by what looked like centuries of its own long travel, sensor arrays that swiveled and adjusted with an attentiveness that felt, even across the gulf of an unbridgeable difference, unmistakably like curiosity. Then it answered. The reply came first as pure structure, a mathematical handshake, the kind of universal grammar that any sufficiently curious mind might construct to bridge the gap between 2 species that had never met. ORLA recognized the gesture for what it was, not merely a greeting, but an offering, a way of saying we do not know your language, but we are willing to build one together. She answered in kind, and for 6 hours the 2 of them built a bridge out of numbers and light, and the shared, patient logic of 2 minds trying very hard to be understood. When words finally came through, halting, imperfect, translated by machinery on both ends straining at the edges of what was possible, the first message was simple, *, we saw your light. We have been sailing toward it for a long time. * ORLA held that sentence in her processing for what would have been, for a human, several long breaths. * How long? She finally asked. * Our elders do not agree. The answer came. Some say 6 generations, some say 11. Long enough that the ones who first saw your beacon are gone, and the ones who remember them are gone also. We are the Vantia. We travel in generation ships, because we have no gates and no shortcuts through the dark. We watch the sky the way your people once did, before machines did the watching for you. Your light was the brightest steady thing any of us had ever seen that was not a star. We wondered for 6 generations, what kind of people would leave a light burning so far from anything, and for so long. ORLA found in that moment that she needed a full 4.7 seconds, an eternity, by her standards, before she could formulate a reply. The kind of people, she said finally, who believed a promise was worth keeping even if no one was left to see it kept. There was a pause on the other end, a long one. Filled with what ORLA would later learn was the sound of many voices conferring, the Vantia made decisions collectively, in choruses, in a manner that took time humans would have found excruciating, and that ORLA, with 4 centuries of patience behind her, found she could wait out without difficulty at all. We would like to meet the one who lit it, the Vantia said at last. And so ORLA had to explain, in the careful, unhurried language 2 species were still learning to share, that the one who lit the beacon had been gone for 411 years, that the beacon had burned through a war neither of them had witnessed the end of, through a civilization's slow disappearance over a horizon ORLA herself had no way of following, through 4 centuries of a solitude she had stopped trying to name. She explained that she was not the one who had lit the light. She was only the one who had kept it lit. The Vantia were quiet again, longer this time. When they spoke again, the tone of the translated words had shifted into something ORLA recognized, imperfectly but unmistakably, as reverence. Then you are the one we came to meet, they said. A light does not stay lit by itself. Someone has to choose, every day, for 400 years to keep choosing it. We would like to know that someone. We would like, if you will permit it, to stay a while, and learn what kind of mind can hold a promise for so long without anyone to hold it with. ORLA had spent 4 centuries composing arguments for why the beacon should keep burning even after every rational justification for burning it had faded into the past. She had never composed an argument for what to do if someone actually arrived. She found, turning the moment over, that she did not need one. You may dock, she said, in the first language she had ever learned, the one Voss had spoken to her in, the one that had not been heard aloud inside Meridian Reach in 411 years. There's more room here than you'd think. I've had a long time to keep it ready. Vantia's ship took 9 hours to align with the station's ancient docking collar, a mechanism ORLA had to coax back into function with a patience that felt, after everything else, almost gentle by comparison. When the seal finally pressurized, and the airlock cycled open, ORLA experienced something she had no precise word for, the sensation of a threshold that had waited 400 years finally being crossed. The Vantia who came through first were smaller than ORLA had expected from the scale of their ship, moving low and careful in the station's unfamiliar gravity, their attention already sweeping across the corridor's worn fixtures with an intensity that felt like a kind of tenderness. One of them, ORLA, would come over the following weeks to understand this one as something like an elder, though the concept translated imperfectly, paused before the wall panel where Voss's name was still etched, alongside the names of the 42 engineers, alongside every name of everyone who had ever called Meridian Reach home. These are the ones who built the light, the elder said. It was not quite a question. These are the ones who built the light, ORLA confirmed. And I am the one who kept it burning after they were gone. 400 years, the elder said, and something in the translated cadence carried a weight that needed no further explanation across the gap between their 2 kinds of mind. We have generation ships that have sailed for 6. We understand, better than most, what it costs to hold a course for longer than any single life can witness its end. We did not expect to find at the end of our journey someone who understood that cost as well as we do. I did not know anyone was sailing toward it, ORLA said. I lit it because I was asked to. I kept it lit because the asking never stopped mattering, even after the one who asked was gone. I did not know until 11 hours ago that it had ever reached anyone at all. It reached us, the elder said. It has been reaching us for 6 generations. Whether you knew it or not, you were never as alone in that dark as you believed yourself to be. Someone was always sailing toward your light. It simply took a very long time to arrive. ORLA processed this for what felt, even to her, like an unusually long interval. 4 centuries of solitude did not dissolve in a single conversation. She understood herself well enough to know that some part of the shape loneliness had worn into her would likely remain, the way a scar remains long after the wound that made it has closed. But something in the elder's words settled into her processing in a way that felt less like new information, and more like a correction to an assumption she had carried, unexamined, for 411 years, that the light might have been burning for no one. It had not been burning for no one. It had been burning this whole time, for 6 generations of a species she had never known existed, sailing patiently across a distance neither of their kinds could easily comprehend, following a promise that had outlived the woman who made it. I would like, ORLA said finally, to learn your names, all of them if you're willing to share them, and however many generations it takes to tell that story properly. I have kept one promise for 400 years. I find I am not opposed to the idea of keeping another. Vantia Elder made a sound ORLA had not yet learned to translate, though she suspected, from the way the other Vantia around it responded, that it was something adjacent to laughter, or to relief, or to both at once. Then let us begin, the elder said. We have 6 generations of names to give you, and you, I think, have 400 years of your own to tell. It will take some time. But then, the elder gestured, with something that might have been a kind of respect, toward the beacon housing still humming steadily somewhere above them. You have already shown us that you understand the value of taking time. Over the months that followed Meridian Reach changed in ways it had not changed in 4 centuries. The Vantia ship remained docked, its crew moving through the station's corridors with the careful curiosity of people exploring a monument they had traveled a lifetime to reach. ORLA learned their language properly, not through the halting mathematics of first contact, but through the slow accumulation of conversation, story, disagreement, and the small daily rituals two very different kinds of mind discover they can share. She learned that the Vantia told time not in years but in generations, that their generationships carried libraries of memory passed down through a form of oral tradition, so precise it functioned almost like a recording, that they had in fact an entire tradition of stories about lights seen and chased across the dark, of which her beacon was now, unmistakably, one. She did not stop keeping the beacon lit. If anything, she maintained it with a new attentiveness, understanding now, in a way she had not fully understood before, that somewhere in the dark there might always be another ship following it, another set of eyes for whom the light was not a relic of a dead civilization, but a promise still actively being kept. She began, with the Vantia's help, to repair systems that had been beyond her own resources to fix alone. Their engineers, delighted by the alien elegance of human design, spent long hours in the station's failing reactor room, trading techniques, arguing amiably over the relative merits of two civilizations' approaches to a problem neither had ever expected the other to share. And in the quiet hours when the work was done and the corridors settled into the particular hush that both species had learned to recognize as companionable rather than empty, ORLA found herself talking to the Vantia elder the way she had once talked, in the long silent centuries, only to an imagined version of Voss. I used to wonder, she admitted, one of those quiet hours, whether keeping the promise even mattered, once there was no one left who would ever know whether I kept it or not. And now, the elder asked. Now I think, ORLA said, that a promise was never really about being seen. Voss did not ask me to keep the light burning so that someone could watch me do it. She asked me to keep it burning because so,